Does your faith break through? Are you one of the few? Oh, are you one of the few?
Well, we want to welcome you to episode 75 of The Few. I'm Bill.
And I'm Ed, and today we're going to be talking about conflict again. And if you're familiar with our show, you know that we did this early on. Today we're taking a little bit of a different approach, Bill. We're going to try to back up from the crisis point of conflict and talk about how we can lead in such a way to try to avoid what we call life-threatening conflict. And life-threatening is a term that we get from Bonham and Furr in their book Leading Congregational Change, where they divide conflict into two categories: life-threatening or life-giving. Because if you go back and listen to our other podcasts, you know that we feel like conflict is good and can be good, but we don't want it to be bad conflict. And so today we're going to try to talk about how you can avoid bad conflict.
Yeah,
I think
avoiding conflict might be a little bit of a misnomer because, I guess the better would be avoiding destructive, or trying to, prevent destructive conflict.
You don't want to avoid all conflict because
right.
I think, we can make a case, and many have made the case, that conflict is the point of growth. You really can't have growth or movement forward without some conflict. And so what you're looking for is to manage conflict in such a way that it's, according to Bonham and Furr, life-giving, and then avoiding conflict that is life-threatening. And that comes in how you manage conflict, but it also comes, I think, in what happens before conflict arises. And so that's what we're really looking at today is, how do we avoid that life-threatening conflict.
All right. Well, before we get into that, I think we should do a little bit of front porch wisdom.
What's your front porch wisdom for today?
The wisdom that I have for today is kind of a distillation of experience and, I don't know, looking at our culture. And we live in a culture where it seems that everybody wants to silence voices of dissent. We call it the cancel culture. We got to be careful not to say things that trigger people. Folks are describing, words as violence now. That if you say something inappropriately or in a way that is offensive to someone, that it's to the point where they're saying words are violent. And I can understand in some ways and in some contexts that might be the case, but what's happened is it's like we can't have disagreements anymore. We can't have healthy dialogue. There's almost no such thing as debate when we are looking at, specific issues that are complex, and we need to have debate on best approaches and best practices. But what's happened is we've been forced into sides. We're forced to pick a side today. And so when that happens, a lot of times you silence voices. And I just, we were talking a few weeks ago, and the thought came to my mind, and I believe it's pretty good wisdom, not because it came from me, and I'm sure someone else has said it, but I guess my front porch wisdom would be, this: when you silence a voice in the room to avoid conflict, or in an effort to avoid conflict, you inevitably invite more severe conflict in the long run. And I think that there's a little bit of wisdom there, because we all want to be heard. And if we feel that our opinion doesn't matter, if our voice isn't being heard, if our perspective has no opportunity to be shared, then we're going to find some way to rebel, or we're not going to engage in any process of reconciliation or developing a better plan for whatever it is you're dealing with. So, my front porch wisdom would be, when you silence the voice in a room, you ultimately invite more severe conflict in the long run. And we're going to bring that up. That kind of leads into what we want to talk about here in a little bit.
Right. Yeah, we'll use that. That will be a big part of what we how we avoid conflict. And I think it's good wisdom. And I think we're all probably guilty of it at times, because we're always kind of wanting to get a point across instead of listening to others, and we end up silencing people. And then we wonder why we get so much of an emotional backlash sometimes. And sometimes it's our fault. Sometimes it's because we didn't give people space to be able to communicate how they were feeling or what they were thinking at certain times. And I know this happens in the church world a lot. It happens in the business world a lot. I think it's very applicable for all of us. So good wisdom, Bill.
Yep.
Thanks for sharing.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, I think my wisdom for today is just a book recommendation. It's a book that's pretty popular that probably a lot of our listeners have read, but I've just been kind of starting into it. It's called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And I just find it a really neat book. You read so many books around leadership and self-improvement and those kinds of things in the church world and in the business world. And so much it's just a rehashing or a regurgitation of somebody else's ideas. What I like about this book is it's kind of, it's newer stuff. I'm sure that other people have written about it before, but for me, it's been kind of new stuff. And what I really like about it is it's very practical in kind of how to develop good habits and how to break bad habits. And I think we probably all could benefit from some better habits, and probably all could benefit from getting rid of some bad habits in our lives. And he does a lot of, it's not a church book, it's based on science, on how we think and the neocortex and all those kind of things. But it's really eye-opening, and some real practical ideas in there for how to make better habits. And what it's done for me is in my leadership, I'm a big kind of 4DX model, the objective key OKR model leadership guy. If you know what those are, we talked about those on the podcast. But you kind of just start with big goals and break them down into smaller goals, and then you have your kind of weekly initiatives that help you make all that happen. For me, I've started to look at my weekly initiatives as habits. Like, what good habits do I need to start that will help me accomplish these goals in my life? And then concentrating on the habits rather than the goals, because we all know that we never reach our goals unless we change what we do on a daily basis, right? And so how do I develop these good habits that help me meet my personal goals, my professional goals, those sorts of things? And so I really like it. So I would suggest that if you haven't read James Clear's Atomic Habits, that you jump out there and grab that book. And matter of fact, I can imagine that maybe we'll have a podcast coming up here that goes through that book a little bit, because some really good information. So that's my wisdom for the day. Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Well, as we start kind of diving into this issue of avoiding conflict, or avoiding destructive conflict, staying ahead of it, one of the things that we think is important is we would say knowing your environment. How would you describe the meaning of that when we say know your environment?
Yeah, so I think if we're really trying to lead in such a way to avoid conflict, knowing your environment really is about, the old Andy Griffith show, Barney Fife always saying, nip it in the bud, we got to nip it in the bud. And really that's what you're doing, I think, with knowing your environment. It is trying to be perceptive enough, in the Christian world, we would call it discernment, trying to discern, being observant, knowing situations and knowing the people involved, knowing the atmosphere involved, the organization, the situation, knowing all of that well enough to be able to address things before they blow up into a full-blown life-threatening conflict. That's how I would describe knowing the environment. And then again, there are pieces to that, right? There's you have to know your people, you have to know the situation. You don't want to be blindsided, as a leader,
Right.
Being blindsided can cause incredible conflict. It's like someone blows up and you're like, man, where'd this come from? Why are they upset? I never anticipated this. One of the reasons we don't anticipate those things is because we're not involved enough in the life of the organization itself, whether it's a church or a business, or the people that are a part of that to be able to say, oh, this is brewing here.
Yeah.
Here's some things that people are saying that aren't really upset, not really a conflict yet, but it could be. And then we address it before it gets into a full-blown conflict.
Yeah.
What say you about this?
I was, there are many ways in which I'm still naive. I mean, I'll just be honest with you. I kind of tend on the
aren't we
side
all?
of trusting people. I mean, I tend to trust people when they say, they're for something, that they're for it. I don't.
Right.
It's not my nature to try to find ulterior motives or to be suspicious of people. I've had to force myself to be a little bit more discerning. And one of the
Right.
learning experiences, like I remember being at South Parkersburg Baptist with you, and you mentioned one time to me, you said you need to pay attention to the converse when you're in a room, when there's a bunch of people gathered in a room, and we're going through a season of change. You need to pay attention to who's talking to whom around the room, and because that can and that can help you anticipate, where some questions or maybe disagreement or disgruntledness might arise, and
Right.
that was a good learning experience for me. And I won't say that I enter a room, and anytime I'm around a group of people that are involved in leadership or whatever, that I'm suspicious to the point where I'm always watching and I'm scared of conspiracy theories. But I think it's wise
Right.
and it is discerning when you're in the midst of leading and you're leading through change to pay attention to your environment to the extent that you do look for who's talking to whom, because it helps you anticipate where questions or concerns or issues might arise. And as a leader, if you demonstrate the ability to address those issues as they rise readily in the group of people and among the group of people that God's called you to lead, it just enhances your ability to lead effectively, and the
Right.
people that you serve as a leader grow. I guess their respect for your leadership increases. But those things
Yeah,
don't happen by accident. It takes the discipline of paying attention, knowing your environment.
Right. Right, it does. And I think you've mentioned something there you have to be careful of. You don't want to actually approach this from a I don't trust everybody, kind of viewpoint.
Right.
You want to approach it from I just want to learn more, right? And it doesn't mean that people are talking negative. You can listen for the positive things too, and know who the
Right.
stakeholders are in the situation, who are going to be key people in initiating change or in following, the vision or the mission that you're laying out. But it's just like you said, it's just really an awareness. It's a situational awareness that you bring that I think really, really helps people, stave off or at the very least allows them to manage conflict that comes in a way that it's not life-threatening, because you simply have been dealing with the situation before it blows up, before it gets that crescendo of, hey, this is, it's a huge problem now. And you're surprised. And then usually what happens when that happens is then you're just reacting, right? You're just reacting to the last phone call you got or the meeting you had, rather than being proactive because I heard someone ask this question of someone else, or I heard this little bit of grumbling. I'm going to get out ahead of this and deal with this before it becomes a huge issue. And so it makes you a whole lot more proactive than reactive in dealing with things.
So as we talk about knowing your environment, is this where you think the self-awareness piece fits in the conversation? Knowing yourself and what you bring to the table?
I do. I think if you go back and listen to some of our early episodes where we talk about self-awareness, I think we probably made the point in there that, what we're talking about in situational awareness and being aware of what other people's kind of emotional responses are to certain things and those sorts of stuff. It's really hard to get a handle on that unless you have a healthy level of self-awareness, right? The more you get to understand emotional intelligence, let's just use that phrase for now, the easier it is for you to recognize that in other people. And so I think it's very much so. I think if you are the more self-aware you are, the easier it is for you to discern what people are thinking, what their motives are, those sorts of things. And you want to be really careful with that too, right? It's the same as, when you look at spiritual gifts that are outlined in the Bible, discernment, is usually understood as a spiritual gift that is outlined in the New Testament. And you want to be careful with that as well, because you don't want to think that you're perfect at that, right? That even if it's a spiritual gift you think you have, you also need to understand you're not a perfect person. And so you can misinterpret things. And we'll talk about that here when we go down to one of the next points, but you don't want to draw a judgment too quickly. You want to be more curious about it. You want to say, it may be that this is what this person's thinking. It may be that this is what I'm going to have to deal with. You don't want to make blanket kind of judgments that this is what this person's thinking, right? But you won't be able really to pick up on those things. You won't be a very good discerning person unless you first have a healthy level of self-awareness, be able to see those things in yourself before you can see them in others.
All right.
That's my opinion. So,
Amen. And I would agree.
So the next one we have here. So really, we're going down through four things, and to avoid life-threatening conflict. First is know your environment, and the second bill is what?
To communicate effectively, have good and effective communication. And so this is where my comment at the beginning of the episode kind of comes in. When you silence a voice in the room to avoid conflict, you invite more severe conflict in the long run.
Right.
Effective communication is always a two-way street. You need to speak and be clear on what it is you're striving to communicate. And you need to do that multiple ways. And if you're in leadership, it is your job to kind of set the narrative, but to set it clearly. Right. Because if you fail to do that, then everybody else, they're going to find ways to fill in the blanks and say and make assumptions. So one, it's vital that we communicate clearly, but the other side of it is communication is a two-way street, and so we have to listen well and give people place to speak and opportunity to speak and in a way that they know that their voice is being heard.
Right. Yeah, and I think this leads into what you and I have had a lot of conversation about, and we're working on some stuff with our organization, Renew Transformational Strategies, where we're putting together some workshops and some different things around this whole idea of curiosity, right? Because this is, I think, where it lends into authentic communication is this idea of having this attitude of curiosity. I've become convinced over the last year and a half that curiosity is one of the key words to effective leadership. When you're talking about being a person of faith and you're trying to grow as a follower of Christ, curiosity, your level of curiosity impacts how much you're learning and growing and how much you're praying, how much you're studying scripture, how much you're wanting to know. It's that desire to know more, to grow, to really get at the truth. And then when you take it over into relationships and we're looking at how do we stave off this life-threatening conflict, if you're going to be a good communicator, you need to be curious about the people you're talking to. What normally happens, or at least what I've been guilty of, and I think a lot of people are as well, is you go into a situation and you're wanting to win the argument, or you're wanting to make your point. You're trying to strategize, how can I get this person to agree with me? And if you would flip that around and go into those conversations with, I really want to know the truth of what this person thinks. I want to know why they think what they think. What are their motives behind the behavior that they're exhibiting right now? If you go in with that level of curiosity, I think that will allow you to have an authentic and vulnerable conversation that's much more likely to make sure you don't go through life-threatening conflict. It's going to build trust. It's going to get to the bottom of the elephant in the room, as they say. And I just think we're in a society right now that has lost that. It's more about, I'm in this group and this is my pitch, and I want to make sure that I know how to pitch it well, and I want to convince people to agree with me. and become part of my group, the way I think, the way I see it, you know. So this curiosity, I think, is huge when it comes to effective communication.
I think
Really, man.
when I think about the curiosity piece, the thing for me is, being willing to strive to hear and I guess empathize, listen to those that we might disagree with strongly, and the
Right.
challenge there is, it can become a bit emotional for us, and when we get emotional, and we begin to respond emotionally, it has a way of escalating things. And I'm reminded of Proverbs 15:1, where it says, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir
Yeah.
up anger. And if we, in the midst of conversation, and demonstrate a willingness to listen to someone, even if they begin to get animated, we actually de-escalate the situation and create an environment where if we choose not to respond in kind as that conversation begins to escalate,
Right.
by being calm and empathetic and actually listening, we'll move toward constructive dialogue. And generally, and there, I found a couple of articles that speak to this. When we respond in that way, what often happens is reciprocity. And reciprocity doesn't always have to be a bad thing. You get back what you put in, or you get back what you pour out. And if you pour
Right.
out and demonstrate, empathy and good listening skills, patience, then you're a lot more apt to receive that in return as you share with the one you're in conflict with, as you share
Yeah.
things that they find difficult to hear.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you can, in a very practical sense, you can think about this in terms of if someone comes into your office and they sit down and they're mad and they start telling you why they disagree with let's just say you've got some new project you're working on or something at work or in the church, and they disagree with it, and they come in, they're angry, and they come at you, then you've got a real quick, a real quick opportunity to make a decision very fast on the playing field. Do I respond this way, and it's like, well, this is why we're doing this, and your voice gets animated, or you can sit back and you can say, look, it's obvious that this has made you angry. Tell me, I really would like to understand, why is this such an emotional issue for you? Or I would really like to understand where you're coming from. Maybe I've missed something here, right? If you do that, and trust me on this, because I've done it, and it's not my normal way of conversation. I have to discipline myself to do it. But you can just watch the air come out of that person as they deflate, and start to have a conversation, like you said, that is constructive rather than just I want to make my point, you want to make your point, and that just escalates the conflict, So I totally agree and think this is a great place, and I think your quote is pretty awesome. When people feel silenced, not just because they're not able to speak, but because they're not heard. And so you have to hear their voice, not just allow them to speak. There's a lot of people that speak and we never hear what they say, And so it really is important for us to listen. And one of the greatest ways I think we can listen is to develop this attitude of curiosity, where we authentically really want to know what they're thinking, what's driving their behavior, what's making them tick on this particular thing. So that's two. So I think the second one really leads into the third one, right? Which is
which
hold your
your
judgment.
judgment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hold your judgment.
Yeah.
I'm not good at that. If I could be very honest,
Yeah.
it's not always an easy thing for me to do. I tend to be. I think I hide it well, but I tend to be judgmental, and I battle that regularly. You make
Right.
assumptions about what's behind what someone is saying, and
Right.
it's really hard. to hold or withhold your judgment and hear someone out, but in doing so and finding ways to demonstrate that we are withholding our judgment, it creates a more healthy environment where that, again, the person feels heard and you actually do hear what they're saying, and a lot more good can come out of it.
Right. Well, and that's why I think we say, it's so related to the second one, be a good and effective communicator, because really, honestly, you can't be a good and effective communicator if you walk into every situation having already made up your mind about why this person's doing what they're doing,
Right.
what their motives are, and then you jump to that next step of labeling it good or bad, right?
Right.
To me, that's kind of the essence of judgment. I look at this person and I'm like, okay, as a church, we're trying to, develop a new community ministry. And this person has questioned that, right? And so immediately I say, well, their motive is they don't believe in community ministry. And immediately I say that's bad. And so that person's bad. So I walk into that conversation already knowing in my head, because this is my perception I've convinced myself of, this person's a bad person who's standing against something good, and they have no good reason for that. Rather than being curious and holding that judgment and saying, why would this person disagree with this, And rather than me answering that question, ask them that question and then try to discern as they talk what the truth behind the matter really is. And again, I just don't think we can move forward. This will just create all kinds of conflict when we start labeling people and judging people and attributing motives to them before we really understand what their motives are. Because sometimes we're totally wrong on our judgments.
Yeah. How often does conflict, the root of conflict, boil down to someone assuming motive that really wasn't was at the heart of what the actions of the person that they're opposed to? I mean, we all do it. I mean, unless someone has come out, someone whom we trust to tell us the truth has come out and said, I feel this way, I'm responding this way because, then we all have a tendency to assign motive of some kind. We try to evaluate and try to make get behind why they would choose to do that, and a lot of times it's not a fair. The assumptions that we make about motive, I think the only way to truly know motive is to hear it directly from that person. You can evaluate situations. You can look at actions that people have taken and try to read between the lines. But ultimately, motive is something that we generally need to hear from the person that we're dealing with. Why? Asking that why question.
And we still might have to utilize that gift of discernment to figure out if they're telling the truth or not, right? I mean, we still might have to read between the lines, but we're going to get a whole lot better opportunity to get at the truth if we're in a conversation where we're hearing them, where it's not just an emotional response and there is a dialogue going on. I mean, that's just the bottom line is where there is a dialogue going on between two people, you're much more likely to get at the truth of a situation. So, and we flow into the fourth one from this, which is really just be authentic and fair, right? It is, if you're a person who is known for treating people differently, or if you're a person who's known for being unfair, you're never going to be able to stave off conflict in your organization. It's just that simple. So you want to be working in those personal relationships of building trust, doing these things we've been talking about, but understanding that any conflict you face down the road, it's much less likely that it's going to be life-threatening if you have a higher trust with the people you lead. And the higher trust with the people you lead often comes through just being authentic and fair. And as people of faith and faith-based leadership, whether you're in the church or the workplace or a nonprofit, this is ultimately one of the most important things you can do. It's not about, it's not so much about how you handle the conflict during the conflict. It's about who you are leading up to the conflict. That will make a big difference in the trust level of people when you hit a patch where you might have disagreement and those sorts of things. And you can find that I think that if individuals who are truly trying to follow Christ are authentic and real, then that conflict can become incredibly life-giving rather than life-threatening. But you have no chance if you're a person who is not authentic, if you're not fair, if you're not living out your values with the people in your organization on a daily basis.
And I think a lot of times the mistake, I would, Ed, and I think a lot of times the mistake that we make is that we assume too much trust, or we like
Right.
we make the assumption that people know me well enough, or they know that I would not do that, or I would not have that motive, and that they do trust. And I think as a young leader, one of the biggest mistakes that I made was making that assumption. I mean, I hadn't been in situation long enough in that leadership context long enough to try to accomplish, to move the envelope as far as I was trying to move it. And it created, because there wasn't sufficient trust, I mean, there was a lot of pushback, and it made it very difficult.
Right.
And so allowing time and to demonstrate who you are, and for people to get to know you and see that you genuinely are someone who is trustworthy, who has integrity, who is the same person no matter where they find you, whether it's with others in the boardroom or it's at the ball field, that you are who you present yourself to be, that you are transparent, that you don't operate with hidden agendas. All those things create the opportunity to navigate conflict in a healthy way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with you. So, well, there you have it. We're trying to shorten our podcast a little bit. If you have a reaction to that, if you like it being shorter, let us know. If you don't like it being shorter, if you'd rather listen to us for a whole hour instead of about a half an hour, let us know that too. We're just trying to be the best we can be at what we're doing to serve you in a way that helps you be the leader God has called you to be. So just remind you that we love for you to share these episodes with people. We're trying to get back into the routine of doing it on a regular basis. We've been kind of sporadic in releasing episodes lately. So let us know what you think. You can email us at ed@renewts.com or bill@renewts.com if you would rather. You can also go on our Facebook page. You can visit the Renew Transformational Strategies webpage if you would like as well. Many ways you can give us some feedback, but we appreciate all of you. And until next time, we hope that you are
one of the few.
Does your faith break through? Are you one of the few? Oh, are you one of the few?